Under the soft glow of chandeliers shaped like frozen stars, the hush of wealth whispered through every corner of Le Mirabelle, the most elite restaurant tucked into the golden heart of downtown Chicago. The evening felt like velvet, quiet, composed, broken only by the gentle fingers of a pianist, weaving notes through the air. Each table was its own little kingdom of power and elegance, lit by candles and crowned with crystal. In the farthest corner, mostly hidden behind a cascade of orchids, sat Nathan Whitmore, 48 years old, a billionaire tech innovator, and a man quietly drowning in grief. His charcoal suit hugged his lean frame perfectly. His silver watch caught little darts of light, but none of it could disguise the hollow ache behind his eyes. He stared blankly at the filet mignon in front of him, untouched, aromatic, and warm, but to him, it may as well have been sand. Across from him, the empty chair spoke louder than anything else in the room. His hand gripped the stem of a Bordeaux glass, watching the swirl of red wine like it held memories. It had been 10 years since the accident that took Eleanor, his wife, and Michael, their little boy, a crash of steel and fire, and then silence. Since that day, Nathan had filled the emptiness with schedules, strategies, and stone walls. He lived his life like a ghost behind glass. Just as he lifted the glass to his lips, a voice rose beside him, soft, shaking, and entirely unexpected. "Excuse me, may I have your leftovers, sir?" He froze. Nathan slowly turned, and standing beside his table was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 19. Her blonde hair was tangled into a loose bun, with strands falling in tired waves around her cheeks. Her coat was faded and threadbare, barely shielding her from the crisp early autumn wind. In her arms was a baby, no more than 8 months old, bundled in a thin, worn blanket. The baby's eyes, big and glassy, were fixed on the steaming mashed potatoes and steak resting untouched on Nathan's plate. Her voice had been barely a whisper, but it had cut through the hush of the restaurant like glass breaking in a cathedral. Brr. A second, Nathan couldn't move. Around them, silverware froze midair. Conversations melted into stunned silence. A waiter started to approach, concern furrowing his brow, but Nathan raised one hand. The gesture was slight but unmistakable. His eyes returned to the young woman. She didn't flinch under his gaze. She didn't look embarrassed or manipulative. There was no trace of pity or self-pity in her face, only sheer exhaustion, and something even deeper, a quiet, immovable strength. Not for herself, but for the child pressed tightly against her chest. She didn't look like someone begging for food. She looked like a soldier in the final hours of a war, still standing, because she refused to let her baby go hungry. There was something in her eyes, a dignity that startled him more than anything. Nathan's chest tightened. The flame of the candle between them flickered, and in that tiny moment, something shifted inside him. Not a dramatic revelation, not yet, but a small, persistent tremor in the walls he'd spent a decade building. He didn't know it then, but that single question would lead him toward something he hadn't believed he could feel again: redemption, and something far more fragile: love. He remained motionless for a few seconds longer, like a thread was being pulled taut inside him. Then, quietly, he nudged his plate toward her. "Take it," he said. She didn't pounce. She didn't eat like someone desperate. Instead, with calm and care that felt sacred, she pulled a small square of fabric from her worn satchel. It was clean, though fraying at the edges. She gently wrapped the steak and mashed potatoes inside, folding the cloth like she was handling something precious, not just leftovers. Then she knelt to one knee, pulling her baby close, and reached into her coat pocket for a small plastic spoon. Nathan watched, unable to blink, as she blew on the food and carefully guided it into the baby's mouth. The child opened instantly, his tiny lips parting. The moment the warm potatoes touched his tongue, he let out a gurgling coo of joy so pure it made Nathan's hand tighten around the table's edge. The baby smiled, wide and radiant, the kind of smile that cracks through winter and reminds you what sunlight used to feel like. Nathan hadn't seen a smile like that since his own son. He looked away just for a breath to steady the blur in his eyes. But the moment the baby made another happy noise, His gaze snapped back. She fed him slowly, one spoonful at a time, steady hands, calm breath. She didn't glance around. She didn't care who was watching. She was there only to feed her son, and Nathan's heart twisted, slow and deep, like something frozen was starting to thaw. This wasn't charity. This was love, fierce, unapologetic, unbreakable. When the baby seemed satisfied, she carefully tucked the food bundle back into her satchel. She adjusted the blanket around the child, who was now blinking slowly, his little fingers gripping her collar. Then she stood, calm and composed, and looked once more at Nathan, not with gratitude, but with quiet acknowledgement, as if something unspoken had passed between them. She turned and walked away. Through rows of glittering tables, white linen, and polished cutlery, she slipped out of La Mirabelle's grand doors and into the night beyond. The hush inside remained, thick with surprise and something else, shame maybe. But Nathan didn't hear the whispers or feel the curious glances. He just stared at the space she had left behind, the flicker of the candle, the full glass of wine, the empty chair. Before he could overthink it, before reason or ego could interfere, he stood, not with urgency, not with drama, just with a clear, steady motion, like something inside him had decided before he could. He laid his napkin gently on the table, nodded once at the stunned waiter nearby, and stepped through the same heavy doors into the autumn night. The city outside was a distant. He caught sight of her just as she turned down a narrow side street, the baby pressed close to her chest. She moved with purpose, but also caution, like someone used to dodging eyes, hiding from danger. Nathan followed, his footsteps light on the pavement, keeping his distance. He didn't know why he was doing this. He wasn't sure he could explain it even to himself. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. The alley opened up into a forgotten parking lot, cracked and crumbling between old brick buildings. Most of the cars looked abandoned, except one, an old dented navy blue sedan. Rust lined the edges. One of the back windows was covered with plastic. The windshield was fogged, but the car had signs of life. A stuffed animal on the dashboard, a baby bottle on the seat. She approached it without hesitation, opened the back door, crawled inside with the baby, settling into what clearly served as her shelter. Nathan stopped in the shadows, not daring to go further, watching. Inside the car, she laid the baby on a folded blanket, thin but neatly arranged. She whispered something only he could hear. Then she started to hum. It was faint, soft, a lullaby he hadn't heard in decades. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. The baby's little hand reached for her sweater, his eyes already fluttering. The melody wrapped around Nathan like a thread, pulling him closer, anchoring him to something real in a world he had long since drifted away from. He stepped forward. Something must have alerted her. She turned, eyes wide but not afraid, just guarded. She stared out into the dark until she spotted him. I'm sorry, Nathan said, his hands raised in peace. I wanted to see if you were okay. You followed me, she said, her voice firm, protective. I did. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She simply looked at him, assessing, measuring. I saw how you fed your son, Nathan continued. I've never seen anything like that. I needed to understand. There was a pause, the kind that hung between strangers on the edge of something else. His name is Luca, she said finally. I'm Grace. Luca, he repeated quietly. 8 months? She nodded. He loves mashed potatoes. Nathan let out a soft breath. So did my son. Grace blinked, but she didn't ask. She didn't press. She simply listened, like someone who knew pain when she saw it and didn't need the details to believe it. I was studying to be a nurse, she said. Then I got pregnant. His father disappeared. My parents disowned me. We've been living in this car for 2 months. I clean houses, wait tables, when I can. She didn't sound bitter, just tired. Honest. Nathan glanced at the worn blanket, the folded clothes in the back seat. the bottle tucked into a cup holder like a prized possession. "I can help," he said. "A hotel, some food, whatever you need." "No," she said, lifting one hand. "I'm not asking for money." Surprised, he asked gently, "Then what do you want?" Grace looked down at her son, then back at Nathan. "Just one day," she whispered. "One day where he's warm, full, and safe. That's all." The words hit Nathan like a stone to the chest. Not dramatic, not demanding, just raw and real. Streetlight above them buzzed softly, casting a warm amber hue across her face. And in that light, Nathan saw something he hadn't in years. Eyes that reminded him of Eleanor's. Not exactly the same, but close enough to stir something buried. Too deep to name, the way Grace held her son. The way she stood tall with nothing but love as armor. It chipped something open inside him. He stepped back, unsteady. "Thank you," he said quietly, her brow furrowed. "For what?" "For reminding me I still have a heart." She didn't smile. She didn't move. She just pulled Luca close again and began to hum the lullaby once more. Nathan stood there for a moment longer, the melody floating in the cold, quiet air. And even though she never invited him in, she never closed the door either, and somehow that was everything. From that night forward, Nathan couldn't stop seeing her. Not physically. He didn't return to the parking lot right away. But in his mind, Grace and little Luca lingered like a song. He couldn't forget. While he sat through board meetings, skimmed investor reports, or stared at his glass-walled penthouse, their faces returned to him. Her steady eyes, that child's soft smile, the cloth she had used to wrap up food like it was treasure, the lullaby drifting from a rusted sedan parked behind an abandoned church. He'd spent years building his empire with precision and detachment, but now he found himself thinking like a man who'd been cracked open. Quietly, without ceremony, something was changing, so he acted the only way he knew how, strategically, carefully, silently. At dawn 2 days later, he found the car again. Same place, same blanket across the back seat. He didn't knock, he didn't call out. Instead, he placed a small, insulated container on the ground beside the car, homemade soup still warm. Next to it, he left a box of diapers and a can of baby formula. Then he walked away. He did it again the next morning. This time, a bundle of new clothes for Luca, each piece still tagged but soft, chosen not for brand but for comfort. A teething ring, a small pair of fleece mittens. He arranged for a discreet pediatrician to check in. Through a church outreach program, no questions asked. Grace didn't know who sent the doctor. She didn't ask. When he left, she just held Luca close and whispered, "Thank you," to no one in particular. At first, she was wary. She'd learned to expect disappointment, to brace herself against kindness that came with hidden expectations. But these gifts arrived without strings. No notes, no names, no instructions. They simply appeared, gentle, steady, real. And slowly, fear gave way to something more dangerous. Hope. Then one night, that hope was nearly crushed. It started with a fever. Luca was restless, crying more than usual. Grace tried everything. Cool cloths, lullabies, rocking him in her arms. But by nightfall, he was burning up. His forehead was scorching. His little body was limp. His breathing shallow and rapid. Panic clawed at her chest as she drove through the darkened streets toward the nearest hospital. She burst through the emergency room doors, cradling Luca in both arms, his little face flushed with heat. The woman at the front desk barely glanced up. "He has a fever," Grace said quickly. 104. "He's not responding. Please, I need help." "Do you have insurance?" the receptionist asked, expression unmoved. Grace hesitated. "No, but he's just a baby. Please." "We're at full capacity," the woman said flatly. "You'll need to wait, or try another facility." Grace stared at her, stunned. "He's not breathing right. He needs a doctor now." "I'm sorry. Without proper intake, there's nothing we can do." The words echoed like a door slamming. "Shut." Grace stepped back into the freezing night, Luca trembling against her chest. His cries had faded. That terrified her most. She stood under the hospital's fluorescent lights, her breath coming out in icy clouds. Her fingers shook as she pulled out her old cracked phone, and she typed 2 words, "Help us." She didn't know if he'd see it. She didn't even know why she believed he might care. But 6 minutes later, headlights cut through the night. A sleek black SUV screeched to the curb. Nathan jumped out before the engine fully stopped, his coat catching the wind, eyes blazing with urgency. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He held out his arms. Grace didn't speak. She simply placed Luca in them. The baby didn't cry. He didn't resist. His tiny hand curled around Nathan's finger, weak but certain, like he knew this man somehow meant safety. Nathan strode through the hospital doors like a storm. "I want a doctor. Now," he told the front desk. The same woman blinked. "Sir, this child has a critical fever," he said, voice hard as iron. "I'll cover every cent, but if you make me wait, I will buy this hospital and fire every last one of you." They didn't make him wait. Nurses rushed in. Luca was taken to a private room, vitals checked, medicine administered. Grace collapsed onto a bench in the hallway, hands trembling, vision blurry. Nathan stayed beside her the whole time, silent, unmoving. An hour later, a nurse returned with a soft smile. Luca was stable. The fever was coming down. He was resting and would be monitored overnight. Grace exhaled a breath she hadn't even known she was holding. She looked at Nathan, her voice barely audible. "You came." He nodded. "Of course I did." Tears came, uninvited and uncontrollable. She leaned toward him, chest heaving with relief and grief all at once. Her head rested against his shoulder. And for the first time in 10 years, Nathan wrapped his arms around someone not out of obligation, but because he couldn't bear not to. She didn't have to explain. He didn't ask her to stop crying. He just held her. And in that sterile hallway, surrounded by beeping monitors and faint fluorescent buzz, 2 people who had once forgotten what it felt like to be held simply stayed. Not because of rescue, but because, finally, neither of them had to be strong alone. It began with a single photo, a slightly blurry shot, taken in the middle of the night. Nathan Whitmore, billionaire tech CEO, walking out of an emergency room cradling a baby in his arms. Behind him, a young woman followed close, her expression tired but tender. By sunrise, the photo had exploded across social media. Blog headlines screamed, "Tech billionaire's secret family. Who is the mystery girl with Nathan Whitmore? Struggling." Teen mom and the tycoon, real or rumor? Speculation spread like wildfire. Grace's name didn't stay private for long. A leaked hospital intake form confirmed her identity. And then the commentary began. Some people praised Nathan, called him generous, compassionate, a man of quiet character. Others were cruel. "She's a gold digger." This was all a setup. She saw a rich man and played the part. What kind of man lets himself get emotionally hijacked like this? In the apartment Nathan had quietly arranged for her and Luca, Grace sat alone. The only light in the room came from her phone screen. Every swipe brought more venom. Her hands trembled. Her chest tightened. She turned off the phone and placed it face down, like even the glow of the screen could poison the space. Luca stirred in his crib. She stood and pressed her palm gently against his chest, feeling the rise and fall of his breath. Then she returned to the edge of the bed and stared at the floor until the sky turned gray. When Nathan walked in the next morning, carrying a bag of groceries and a warm smile, he knew something was wrong before she said a word. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes hollow. "I can't do this," Grace whispered. Nathan set the groceries down slowly. "Do what?" "This attention. This mess. I don't want Luca growing up with lies being thrown at his name. I don't want him to read headlines one day and wonder if they're true." Nathan sat beside her on the couch, the distance between them suddenly feeling like a canyon. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. "Neither did Luca." Grace shook her head. "It doesn't matter. People already decided who I am. They always do. Nathan's voice became steady. Then let me show them who you really are. That afternoon, he made one phone call. To his publicist. He didn't want a press release, no damage control, no lawyer-crafted statement. He wanted to speak. The following night, he sat in a quiet studio for a nationally televised interview. No makeup team, no PR coaching, just a single chair, a glass of water, and a host who knew better than to interrupt. Nathan spoke, not about business, not about market trends or tech futures. He started with Eleanor and Michael, his wife and son. He talked about the accident, the silence that followed, the way he built walls of glass and stone around his grief until nothing could reach him, not even joy. I stopped living the day I lost them, he said plainly. And then he talked about Grace. She didn't ask for help, he said. She didn't try to manipulate me. She just wanted to feed her son, and in doing so she gave me something no one else has in 10 years. His voice cracked. She gave me a reason to care again. He paused, looked into the camera. Grace is not a headline. She's a mother. Luca is not a prop. He's a child, a bright, beautiful, real child. I didn't save them. They saved me. The interview went viral before the credits rolled. By morning, the internet had changed its tune. Women shared stories, mothers who had struggled, fathers who had been left behind. Nurses spoke out about how many young mothers fall through the cracks, about how easy it is to judge and how much harder it is to understand. Donations began pouring into women's shelters. One woman in Kansas started a fund called Warm Days for Luca, meant to help single mothers secure safe housing. Grace didn't speak to the press. She didn't write a blog post or share her side. But the next morning, she stood on Nathan's doorstep. She didn't knock. He opened the door before she could. Luca was bundled in her arms. Grace's hair was wind-blown. Her eyes, tired but resolute. I'm not leaving, she said simply. If you still want us, we're here. Nathan didn't speak. He stepped aside and let them in, and for the first time in a decade, his house didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a beginning. The apartment Nathan had rented for Grace and Luca wasn't extravagant, not by his standards. It was simple, modest. 2 bedrooms, soft gray walls, quiet floors, windows that let in golden light each morning. But to Grace, it was everything. She moved in with only 2 duffel bags, a baby carrier, and the kind of weight a person carries when they've never had a safe place to breathe. Yet within a week, the apartment began to feel like it had always belonged to them. Crayon scribbles on the fridge, Luca's first attempts at art, baby socks drying over the heater, the faint scent of lotion and lullabies lingering in the air. Life, small, steady, undeniable, started to grow. Nathan didn't stay, not at first, but he visited every morning. He knocked softly, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes a package of diapers or a new storybook. But over time, the reasons became less important. He came just to be there. Luca would squeal in recognition, bouncing in his crib the second he heard the door. Grace would already have coffee brewing, her hair pulled back in that same loose knot, her expression lighter than he remembered. They began sharing quiet breakfasts. Nathan learned to hold a baby bottle at just the right tilt. How to heat milk without scalding it, how to change a diaper, clumsy at first, then with a kind of competence that surprised even him. He memorized the rhythm of Luca's cries, the difference between fussiness and real distress. He could tell when the boy was tired, overstimulated, hungry, or just wanted to be held, and Grace noticed. She noticed how he didn't force anything. He didn't try to fix her or shape her life. He simply showed up, day after day, not demanding space, just quietly claiming it, with gentle hands and eyes that once held nothing but grief, but now were starting to fill with something new, light. She had never known love that didn't ask for something in return, never known a man who didn't try to own her story. Nathan didn't want to own it, he just wanted to walk beside her in it. There were no declarations, no labels, no plan. They simply lived. One afternoon, as Nathan rocked Luca to sleep in the nursery, the baby's tiny fingers tangled in his shirt. Nathan realized something, simple but seismic. He didn't want to leave, not after the nap, not after the next hour, not even tomorrow. He wanted to stay. Grace saw it in the way he lingered a little longer every evening. How he listened to Luca's babbles like they were symphonies. How he looked at her, not like someone who needed saving, but like someone he could finally breathe beside. One evening, after Luca had finally drifted off to sleep, they sat on the small balcony together. The city shimmered below in gold and blue. A blanket was draped between them, and neither spoke for a long while. Then Nathan turned to her, his voice quiet. "When I lost Eleanor and Michael, I thought that part of me, the part that wanted to belong, to care, it died with them." Grace didn't look away. Her voice was just above a whisper. "You didn't lose it. It just waited." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The moment stretched like a quiet promise. The kind that doesn't need words to be understood. And for the first time in years, Grace smiled. Not the polite kind she gave nurses, or the instinctive kind she gave her son. This one was just for him, and Nathan smiled back. The kind of smile that comes after surviving the darkest parts of your life. They weren't lovers. They weren't yet a family. Not by name, but they were something stronger. Two people who had been shattered by life and had slowly begun to make each other whole. It arrived one afternoon, quiet and unexpected. A plain white envelope slipped under the apartment door. Grace picked it up cautiously. There was no return address, just her name, handwritten in ink that pressed too hard against the paper. She sat at the kitchen table, Luca playing with his stacking cups nearby, and unfolded the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was familiar. It was from her mother. There were no long apologies, no sweeping declarations, just a few lines, penned in small, rigid strokes. "If there's still a chance to know my grandson, I would like to try." Grace stared at the letter for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just sat there in silence, the crumpled paper loose in her hands, while Luca babbled softly in the background. When Nathan arrived later that evening, he found her in the same spot, the daylight fading behind her. "She wrote," Grace said quietly, not lifting her eyes. Nathan stepped forward and took the letter gently from her hands. He read it once. Then again, he folded it and placed it on the table before sitting beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked gently. "I don't know," Grace whispered. "It's been almost 2 years since they told me I wasn't their daughter anymore. Since they turned their backs on me when I needed them most." Nathan nodded. "You don't owe them anything." Grace turned her head, eyes clouded with uncertainty. "But Luca, doesn't he deserve to know where he comes from? Even if it's a broken place?" Nathan took a breath, choosing his words with care. "Don't let him grow up with the same emptiness you carried. Let him have the choice. Let him decide whether to forgive or not. But at least let it be his decision." 3 days later, they drove to the town Grace once called home, a quiet stretch of rolling hills and narrow roads, where the houses all looked the same and every neighbor remembered your name and your secrets. Her parents' house sat at the end of a gravel driveway. White paint slightly chipped, porch swing still swaying in the breeze. It looked untouched by time. Grace stood at the foot of the steps for a long moment, Luca on her hip, his small fingers gripping her sweater. Nathan stood behind her, silent, steady. The front door opened slowly. Her mother appeared, mid-50s, the same sharp cheekbones softened now by time and sorrow. She stepped out, hesitant, her eyes locked on Luca first, then Grace. They filled with tears. "I wasn't strong," her mother said, voice breaking. "I was afraid of what people would say, of losing the version of you I thought I raised. And I lost you anyway." Grace didn't speak. Her mouth parted, but no words came. Then her father appeared behind her mother. Older, thinner. His hands, folded nervously in front of him. He looked at Luca like the boy was made of light, and Luca, knowing none of the history, stretched out a curious hand. That gesture shattered the wall. Her mother stepped forward, tears slipping freely now. Arms open, unsure. May I hold him?" she asked. Grace hesitated. Just a breath. Then slowly she placed Luca into her mother's arms. The woman clutched him gently, sobbing quietly as she whispered to the child. Nathan stood off to the side, eyes tight, saying nothing. He wasn't part of this moment, but he was witness to it. When Grace finally stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother, the entire porch seemed to exhale. The past hadn't vanished, but it had softened. Forgiveness wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow sunrise. Later that afternoon, they all sat at the old kitchen table, the same one where Grace had eaten cereal as a child. Her mother served tea. Her father bounced Luca gently on his knee. His face lit up like a lantern, and for the first time in years, there was laughter in that house. Grace glanced across the room at Nathan. He met her eyes. She mouthed 2 words across the distance. "Thank you." He shook his head, smiling softly. "No," he whispered under his breath. "Thank you for going home." A year passed, quietly, without headlines. The noise faded. The internet moved on. The blogs found other scandals, other faces to obsess over. What remained was far more lasting than attention. A life. Spring came softly that year. The trees bloomed in pale pinks and fresh greens, and the sky held that rare shade of blue that made even strangers smile. It was on such a day that they returned to the park, the same park where it had all started, where mashed potatoes and a whisper had changed the trajectory of 3 lives. There was no crowd, no luxury event planner, no press, just a patch of open field, a humble wooden arch wrapped in ivy, and a white linen blanket laid beneath an old oak tree. Luca, now almost 2, toddled forward in a tiny navy blue vest and bow tie, clutching a small velvet box in both hands. He wobbled a bit in the grass, determined to get the box to the man waiting just a few steps ahead. Nathan stood in a soft gray blazer. The one Grace had once teased made him look almost human. His hair was longer now, a few silver strands glinting in the sun. His eyes, once hollow, were warm, calm, alive. He knelt down, steady and slow, and took the box from Luca's tiny hands. The little boy looked up at him and giggled, then toddled, back to where Grace waited under the oak. She was barefoot in the grass, her white dress fluttering lightly in the breeze. She wasn't wearing makeup. There was no veil. But Nathan had never seen anything more beautiful. Not because of the dress or the sunlight, but because of the light in her eyes. The kind that only comes after surviving darkness. Nathan stepped forward and dropped to one knee. For a moment, the world held its breath. The trees stilled. The wind quieted. The air itself seemed to lean in. He opened the box. The ring was simple, a delicate band, elegant and understated, chosen not for price but for how it would look on her hand as she held their son. "You didn't ask for anything," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "You didn't beg. You didn't expect. You just showed up on the worst night of your life and gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." He paused, swallowing. "You didn't take my leftovers, Grace. You gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. You gave me family. You gave me love. You gave me a reason to be alive." He looked up, eyes shining. "Will you marry me?" Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes welled before the first tear could even fall. She nodded, once, then twice, then dropped to her knees, laughing softly through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes!" They fell into each other's arms, Grace, Nathan, and Luca, who darted back over and latched onto Nathan's leg with a cheerful chirp. "Daddy," the minister cleared his throat and they all laughed. The ceremony was short, honest. The kind of vows whispered rather than declared. Nathan promised to love not just Grace but Luca too, always. To be there in every moment, big and small. To never run. And as if on cue, Luca wandered up again and hugged Nathan's leg, as if to say, "I believe you." Nathan lifted him up with one arm, held Grace with the other, and whispered, "I love you, son." There were no doves, no fireworks, but under the open sky, surrounded by a few close friends and nothing but grass and sunlight, everything that had once been broken began to knit together. Nathan hadn't rescued a young mother. She had rescued him from grief, from silence, from the cold perfection of a life that had everything except meaning. And in its place, something unshakable had been born, not from blood, not from wealth, but from a single question and a plate of untouched mashed potatoes. They didn't fly to Europe for a honeymoon. They didn't post about their vows. They didn't make announcements. Instead, they went home, back to the apartment, with soft gray walls and sunshine in the mornings. Back to a space that smelled like baby lotion, coffee, and warm toast. Back to Luca's coloring pages taped to the fridge, and his soft socks left in strange places. They returned not as newlyweds in the eyes of the world, but as something far more sacred, a family. They moved slowly through life, purposefully. Grace didn't stop being herself, fiercely independent, determined, a mother first before anything else. Nathan didn't try to change that. He didn't buy her diamonds or flood her closet with designer dresses. Instead, he learned to braid Luca's hair when Grace had a migraine. He learned the exact way Luca liked his apples cut. He listened when Grace needed to vent, and he stayed, quiet when she didn't. There were hard days. Of course there were. Days when Grace questioned whether she belonged in Nathan's world. Days when Nathan froze, caught off guard by the grief that still lingered in old photos or sudden memories of Eleanor and Michael. Days when Luca got sick and they both sat on the bathroom floor, exhausted, just trying to keep it together. But through it all, they stayed. Nathan learned that love wasn't about fixing everything. It was about showing up, again and again. With patience, with hands open, with a heart that chose them every single day. One evening, Grace sat at the window while rain tapped softly against the glass. Nathan came in with 2 mugs of tea. Luca was asleep finally, after a tantrum that had lasted nearly an hour. Grace didn't say anything. She was just tired. Nathan sat beside her, slid the mug into her hand, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders, not to comfort, not to talk, just to be. And she leaned into him, not because she was weak, but because she finally could. They never defined what they were in rigid terms. There was no checklist, no perfection, just a mother who had survived when no one believed in her, just a man who had learned to feel again when he thought he never would, and a boy who had started it all without even speaking a word. Luca was growing fast now. His laugh had taken over the apartment. His favorite word was again, whether it was a bedtime story or a game of peekaboo. And every time Nathan scooped him up or kissed his forehead or lay next to him during naps, Grace watched them with a kind of wonder she never said out loud. One night, as Luca fell asleep between them in their bed, his little body curled like a comma between 2 lives once shattered, Nathan whispered into the dark, "You saved me, Grace. You really did." She smiled gently, brushing her fingers along Luca's cheek. "I think we saved each other." And in the quiet that followed, no more words were needed. They had built something real, not flashy, not perfect, but steady, unshakable. A home. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when the knock came. Grace was folding laundry on the couch, humming along to a children's song still playing faintly from Luca's room. The knock wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps, but it was enough to freeze her hands mid-fold. Nathan wasn't home. Luca was napping. She opened the door slowly, and there she stood, her mother, a tote bag over one shoulder, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there last year. Her mouth tried to smile, but it trembled before she could shape the expression. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer," her mother said. Grace stepped aside without a word, not because she had made a decision, just because the moment asked for it. They sat at the kitchen table again, just like the last time. The same wooden chairs, the same warm light through the window. "I've been thinking about you every day," her mother began, fingers nervously tracing the rim of her teacup. About Luca, about how wrong I was. Grace looked at her without blinking. She didn't speak. I didn't know how to be a mother when things didn't go the way I imagined. I was scared, embarrassed, and I failed you. Grace's voice was quiet but steady. You didn't just fail me, you abandoned me. Her mother nodded slowly. I know. There was silence, heavy but not hostile. Then the front door opened, and Luca bounded in from his room, holding a toy truck, calling out, "Mommy." He stopped when he saw the woman at the table. Her mother stood slowly, eyes wet. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. Luca tilted his head, curious, then looked at Grace. "This is your grandma," Grace said gently. He blinked. Then, to everyone's surprise, he smiled. He walked over and held out his toy truck. The older woman laughed softly, accepting it like it was a crown. "I would love to play," she said, kneeling slowly. Later that day, Nathan returned to find all three of them sitting on the floor in the living room, a small pile of blocks between them. He stepped inside without a word, just watched for a moment. Grace looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. "I didn't expect this," she said. "You didn't have to," he replied. "Some things return when we least expect. That doesn't make them less true." She nodded. Her mother stayed for dinner. Nathan cooked. There was no grand reunion, no fairy tale, forgiveness. But there were stories. Laughter. A little girl in a woman's body starting to release the pain she'd held onto for too long. After Luca was tucked in that night, Grace stood on the balcony with Nathan, the cool breeze brushing strands of hair from her face. "She said she wants to be part of his life," she whispered. "And what do you want?" he asked. "I want him to know where he comes from," she said. "But more than that, I want him to know where he's going." Nathan took her hand. "You've already shown him that." They stood in silence as the city shimmered below them, and for the first time since the letter arrived, Grace no longer felt like she was holding her breath. Time passed, not in milestones, but in moments. Grace didn't go back to school right away, though the thought lived quietly in her mind. Nathan scaled back his work, handing more control to his board so he could spend mornings making pancakes and afternoons reading books with Luca. The world outside no longer watched them, and that was exactly how they wanted it. On weekends they took walks through the park, Luca chasing butterflies, Nathan and Grace walking hand in hand. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The silence no longer needed to be filled. They were no longer trying to survive. They were living. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline and golden light poured into their living room, Luca climbed into Nathan's lap, pressing his tiny palms to Nathan's cheeks. "Tell me about the restaurant again," he giggled. Nathan smiled. "You mean the first night we met?" Luca nodded, curls bouncing. Nathan glanced at Grace, who was curled up on the couch, a soft smile on her lips. He turned back to the boy. "Well, your mommy walked in like a superhero," he began. "Only without the cape. Just a frayed coat and the fiercest heart I've ever seen. And she asked me for my leftovers." Luca laughed. "That's so silly." Nathan kissed his forehead. "It wasn't silly to me. It saved me." That night, after Luca was asleep, Grace and Nathan sat by the window. Outside, the city lights blinked like lullabies. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I never said anything that night?" she asked softly. "All the time," he said. "And every time it scares me." She leaned into him. "It was just a whisper, and it changed everything." He replied. They didn't need grand endings or cinematic gestures. Their life was made of quiet victories, of steady mornings, small kindnesses, and the kind of love that's never loud but never leaves. Nathan never replaced what he lost. Grace never forgot what she endured. But together, they built something different. Not a fairy tale, not a second chance at the same story. A new one. One built from broken pieces, repurposed with care. One where Luca grew up, never questioning whether he was wanted, because he was chosen, every single day. One where Grace didn't have to carry everything alone. One where Nathan didn't just open his heart, he opened his life. They were a family not made by blood, but by something far more enduring: choice. And in the end, that choice, made in a restaurant beside a plate of untouched food, became the quiet beginning of everything they never knew they needed.